Hey, good morning. Hello, hello.
Hey everyone.
Hey, good morning.
Jason's in the spirit.
Jason, you really need to have some sort of zoom filter that changes your head into a skull.
Did those exist?
I
That would
don't
be
know.
cool.
I'm
I don't.
sure it must exist. How could it not exist?
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
I mean,
A skull with glasses.
Jason's gonna have that by the end of the meeting.
it should exist for Halloween. Oh my gosh. Yeah, if they can do stuff like this, doesn't seem like a skull is asking too much.
All right. Let's get to the agenda. 1.7 went out this week, and we've already got 2, and I think I was scanning, haven't looked at things yet, but I did see that looks like we might have another paste. Another regression or another patch candidate. John, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, so we uncovered this trying to upgrade the Splunk Android instrumentation to 1.7. And it appears what's happening. So just to talk a little bit about how Android builds work, when an actual application app package gets built, the Android Gradle plugin via the D8 tool, I think it's called D8, converts all the classes in the jars to Android friendly format called Dex or something. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but something like Dex. And it takes into account the API, the minimum API version that you're targeting with your application. And if it comes across any references or usages of classes that are not supported at that API level and are not desugarable by the desugaring library, then the build will fail. It will refuse to actually build the application package. And it looks like in 1.7, the instrumentation API now shadows caffeine 3. I'm taking Lori's word for it. I believe this is probably the case, which apparently has method handle references in it, which then causes the packaging to blow up.
Gotcha. So, and this is the method handle is used inside of the caffeine 3 itself.
That is what I've been told.
Okay. Okay.
Or at least that's what Lori said in the thread that we were writing about it.
All right. So yeah, well.
So just brainstorming a little bit. What if there was an instrumentation API packaging, maybe named differently, that didn't shadow in that stuff, but treated it as a transitive dependency that could then be excluded? It's not going to be a great solution. I mean, it would require anyone who's using it from Android to explicitly exclude that transitive dependency. I'm just brainstorming.
Yeah, I don't have any great ideas uh, for right now, but I hope that we can find some way that would feels like we should be able to find some way to handle this. The problem we brought in caffeine 3 because of that JDK unsupported J-linking. I don't know. Well, that's going to take some thought.
In the meantime, I'm trying to see if I can work around it in this specific case by shading the instrumentation API jar into our library jar and excluding those classes specifically. But I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. Android Gradle is not the same as regular Gradle, so I'm sorting out how Shadow Jar even works with it. So that's what I'm. Would it be a real workaround on the usage, which would be bummer to require everyone to do?
No, we'll figure something hacky out.
But I'm using it as an opportunity to learn a little bit more how shading on Android works. So, that's more information, not necessarily any sort of solution.
Are we building a completely separate Android ecosystem over time, like OpenCensus did, or are we planning to try to use all the same jars and classes?
Well, I think it's definitely one of the, I guess, current stated requirements of the SDK and the APIs that they support Android out of the box with no modifications.
Right, but instrumentation API is a bit different.
Yes,
beast
agreed.
there, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Anyway, if you need experience with hacking Gradle to create a whole new ecosystem for something, we did it in Scala. It uses underscores. It's great. I don't know if I'd recommend that, but I definitely don't recommend classifiers if you were thinking of, because that's another option here is you could have two versions of the instrumentation API, one with an Android classifier. Right, so you could actually publish it twice, one for Java, one for Android. The Android one would have none of the offending classes and would be limited to libraries that are on Android. The problem with using classifiers, though, is your transitive dependencies are not distinct. So it basically forces everyone to do the same trick then, and you're not guaranteed that you get any transitive dependencies. Which is why, like for Scala, they went with that underscore thing, and you actually have like a different module. The reason why I ask is I feel like this is going to continue down the chain of modules, right? But I don't know.
Yeah, in particular, in this case, the only thing I really care about is the OKHTTP instrumentation and being able to customize it. But that customization does happen via the instrumentation API jar. But the only dependency I take is on the OKHTTP instrumentation jar.
Right. The OKHTTP instrumentation is going to pull in. It requires the instrumentation API.
Yep.
Yeah, I think splitting the ecosystem might make sense at individual instrumentations, like if we have to. But I hope that we can the core APIs we can find a way to support, have the common one, because of the whole transitive dependency problem. If we don't, then yeah, that OKHTTP depends on that. You have to exclude that and pull in the Android one.
What changes with caffeine in the API? Like what is actually broken when you remove it?
We have internal caching. We use it for basically instead of like having our like a weak map type of bounded weak map kind of a thing, we use that.
Right, but if you're disabling that in Android, what's replacing it?
Oh, so we have both caffeine 2 and caffeine 3 in shaded inside of the instrumentation API jar. Caffeine 3 requires Java 11, but supports, there was some weird problem we had with caffeine 2 where I don't remember why, but the J-linked modules where people excluded JDK unsupported. Oh, I think because it didn't have unsafe, and the caffeine 2 relied on unsafe, or not unsafe, something in the JDK unsupported
Yes,
module.
it was unsafe.
Yay, Laurie, somebody who knows.
John, maybe you know, like, I think I saw like one way that people work around similar issues is that you can specify some sort of pattern, like what to include inside your application.
Yeah, it unfortunately doesn't work. I've been trying that this morning. It doesn't work, I think, with the transitive dependency, the fact that it's a transitive dependency. I'm not 100% sure, but I've been trying that workaround and it hasn't been working. But even so, I think Trask is stated, and I think I agree, requiring every Android user to do a workaround would be a big bummer.
Is the opposite like worse of instead of shading both into the instrumentation API, having the instrumentation API do like a service lookup and then providing the instance appropriate to the environment later as a dependency?
I see, and then we could split out the two into separate modules, which we would pull in maybe by default, but would still require Android to exclude one. Sounds like an option for sure. Still hoping that we could come up with something that works without extra configuration. But if that's not possible,
If you want to do like a quick hack, then I think Anurag already did some sort of trickery of replacing some classes inside the caffeine. I think method handle is used only in like 2 classes. We could try somehow replacing them, but actually there might be one problem is that those classes that actually contain the method handle reference might be generated classes. So even getting the source for them might be a bit troublesome.
They are generated. I was just checking that, and it's I think Node Factory and Local Cache Factory, and they both have some like factory methods that are completely generated by something called Java Poet, I think, in the Caffeine repo. You can still look up the bytecode, well, even if in our build extracted directory inside our project, but yeah, it's kind of bad.
all right. Any more thoughts on that, or we'll go back, let it filter, and hopefully we'll throw around some more ideas in the issue.
And I think there was a quick suggestion of maybe MRJAR, but Laurie was saying that there was some other reason that I didn't understand that it wouldn't work. So
The issue is that inside agent, we include this jar in the Bootstrap class loader, and Bootstrap class loader doesn't recognize MR jars.
Yeah, that's it. But in the if that's the only problem with that approach, I mean, we have a lot more trickery that we could deal with in the agent, where we could even like put caffeine, pull caffeine in kind of the way it is currently. We could pull it in, shade it into the Bootstrap class loader and do some other things. Do we think that this would solve from a pure API library instrumentation perspective? Would this solve the problem? We don't know. We'd have to.
I don't know if this would solve the Android problem or not. I'm researching Android MR jar, how things are handled in this case.
When I was Googling it, I think I found something on Stack Overflow that hinted that the Dexter fails with MR jars the same way, that it finds the classes that it's not supposed to be finding and still fails. But maybe they have improved it since.
Yeah, John, if you could figure this out, that sounds potentially promising if it did work on Android.
We have MR jars in the SDK right now, right? Like our something resource or clock related.
Clock, yeah, the clock.
And everything is working fine, although I don't know if the clock
Try-
API is. I don't remember.
try
that.
putting a
the-
method
the
handle.
Agent class loader.
Oh, but from, I think John meant from the Android
The
side.
Android, yeah. Okay, what do you all do about that with the?
It's in the agent, it's in the
not in
agent
boot-
class
it's not in
loader.
The Bootstrap, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're using MR jars in the SDK right now, and it seems to be working just fine with Android, but I don't think we're using method handle, but I could easily do some local hacking to test it out. That is on, actually, if you could just create, yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, because I think that is the harder, to me at least, that's the harder problem, is getting it working in the library dependencies, Android. On the agent side, we have all kinds of, I don't mind doing weird hackery since it's not exposed to the users. Cool. Logging updates. Do we have? No, Jack. So we had John. I was wanted to kind of share the discussion that we had last week with Anurag about logging API. Do you want to talk about that? Or I can.
Yeah, if you
it's sort of driven. Yeah,
I remember what we talked about, and I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, because it is sort of driven from the instrumentation use case. So currently we have logging SDK, but the goal, we've always said we're not going to create a logging API, because who needs another logging API? What we're realizing from an instrumentation perspective, like when we're building logging appenders for log4j, logback, it's still nice to know what's having the separation between the API and SDK so that those logging appenders don't pull in the SDK, they know exactly what their API they're allowed to use. And this also then from the agent perspective, this helps us a lot from the bridging manual logging API instrumentation over into the agent the same way that we bridge the tracing API and metrics API. So I don't know if we want to, if anybody has ideas, another name for it, because I mean, we clearly don't want to advertise this as a logging API, but maybe like a logging instrumentation API. I don't know.
You could call it a facade.
Yeah, at the moment, the SDK logs module depends on SDK all, which is really the problem, right? You'd be pulling in all of the SDK as a part of your dependencies, API dependencies. It may be that we can work around that in the SDK itself by making sure there's one published module that is kind of the what you want to use for writing appenders. So like logging appender API or something.
I have a really dumb logging question, I guess. So this is what I was trying to do. I wanted to hijack all my logs and send it to the OTel logger. And then I wanted an exporter that dumps out JSON in the Google Cloud logging format that gets auto-parsed. And I couldn't figure out how I should do that effectively. Like, is that a custom exporter? And if I wire in the logging API, like what gets attached to the MDC? There was like a thing that was missing that I needed to add to MDC for Google Spilly. Should I encode that in my exporter? Like, I think there's having tried to implement one, I have a lot of open questions where I think, I guess what I would call it is the SDK API. I think might need fleshing out more so than anything, and being very careful about what we put there, because holy crap, I was trying to get things working on log backend log4j2, and I forgot how basically the same and different they are. Where something looks like it's the same and then it just doesn't work at all the same between the two, which is infuriating. Anyway, who's driving this? Just curious.
Jack has been doing the most PRs around logging, and he made an attempt in the instrumentation side also, which I think sort of helped flesh out some of these ideas of how, like you were saying, how kind of problematic instrumenting writing a log appender is currently.
And Josh,
Yeah.
it's also, I mean, we want to use it as well in our distribution, but it's not a super high priority.
Gotcha. I mean, like fundamentally, the thing that's kind of weird is I write config in my application for logs, and then it sort of gets things from the current auto agent the way it is, It just felt weird that it wasn't necessarily all in the agent.
So do you from the agent perspective, what we were thinking eventually we will have the instrumentation, right? The auto instrumentation injecting logging appenders, the logging appenders talking to this SDK API, which then we bridge through the Bootstrap class loader and into the agent class loader and would go out through the logging exporter. And so you would be able to configure your logging exporter or through the agent extension, wire in whatever you wanted from the SDK side.
Right, right. I guess the thing that I'm looking for is, and this might be a cloud specific thing on Google Cloud, GKE automatically ingests logs into Google Cloud Logging. And if I'm sending them somewhere else, I don't want that to happen. So I literally don't want anything to hit standard out unless it's formatted for cloud logging, in which case it should go to cloud logging, right? I want it to go just out OTel. Now this, again, this might be very specific to GKE and Cloud Run or Google Cloud Run. But that's kind of the thing, the thing that I'm like, okay, how hard is this going to be to do in practice? And basically, right now we just documented how to take over your logback or log4j config to do that. But you have to go directly at the application log4j and override it, not just attach, right? If that's your use case. Otherwise, again, there's a sensitivity to double logging. Some people are fine with it, but some people absolutely do not want to do that. And that's why I think not just appending, but also taking over should be an option. In other news, I have a demo of metric exemplars, logs with traces, and agent traces all working together from like a vanilla Spring app. Unfortunately, I had to write custom logging code for Google Cloud, but it's pretty cool. The new agent's awesome.
Can you show us?
Not yet. Let me send some emails and then I can. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't seen exemplars in action yet. So
Actually, I might be able to show you a dumb version of it. We have there's a bug, but I'll get that ready for later.
So I do think, I mean, this kind of came up in our discussion last week with Anurag as far as just, I do think, most people already have a logging solution where they're, ingesting log files. So I do think that we have to play nice with that. I don't think it's only a you thing. Cool. Metrics. Oh yeah. So if you haven't seen, there's if you want to try out Java 17 and JFR streaming in Java 17, this is really cool. And a nice some nice examples of how to model metrics. Thanks, Josh, for all the help on the review there. I think for those of us still learning how to model those things properly, it's nice to see examples of things we're familiar with from the Java world getting modeled into different metric types and dimensions and that sort of thing.
I do want to call out that actually the JFR streaming is a good example of things that we don't necessarily have direct instruments for right now, or that possibly will require a user config. Specifically, CPU usage in JFR is sampled at a faster rate than metric export. And so what we're recommending right now, we had a discussion on this, is we're going to put it into a histogram for the highest basically because that's the most accurate way to record that synchronously. So every time JFR samples, like, how much time was spent in a long lock or how much CPU usage there was in a percentage, that's recorded in a histogram. Then the user, if they want the actual export rate that they've configured for metrics, they would need to use a view to use a gauge last value style aggregation for that, to only get the last value if they are worried about like the cost of using histograms. Otherwise, the histogram will give you over a period of time how much CPU used in various things. The fun part here is our histograms are optimized for latency, not percentiles. So there's like a bucket for anything over, 1,000 milliseconds or something, which is going to be useless for percentile CPU. If you're over 1,000%, I think we have major problems with JFR. So there's a lot. I really love this JFR pull request because it's finally getting really good real world use cases for us to push back on the metric spec.
Is there also, I don't know the view API very well. Is there also an averaging view?
An averaging view. So not
to-
really.
So just to clarify my understanding, right, this last value is like between metric samples, like JFR is sampling much faster than our instrumentation samples, or that the metrics samples. Taking the last value is great, but you've lost some fidelity there. Another way of perhaps improving that fidelity is also averaging over that window, right?
Yeah, so the histogram aggregation will do that for you, but it'll also keep buckets. So one thing you can do is you can make a histogram of 0 buckets, and you should get min max last value, or min max average. You get min max sum count. Yeah.
I never thought to do that. Okay, that's great. Good to know.
Yeah,
I
min
wouldn't
max,
have
by
thought
the
of
way,
that
aren't.
too.
Yeah.
Why would you configure a histogram with, what's even the point of a histogram with 0 buckets?
It's actually a proposal from Jack.
You clearly have not been involved in the metrics thing.
No.
No, but I love it. It totally makes sense. Just wouldn't have thought of it.
Right. So I'm actually super excited for when we don't have to define buckets for histograms as well with the high resolution histogram, because that will solve a lot of my concerns around what we're seeing with explicit bucket histograms. And then we have this default set of buckets. I don't feel like it's great for CPU metrics. There was this thing that we were going to have called a hint API, where you could hint at what buckets should be when you instrument, but users can override with views. This is the exact use case where we kind of need that, and we don't have it. It got dropped for the initial release. So anyway, there's a lot of really good things coming out of this JFR streaming outside of these are going to be awesome metrics. So lots of good discussion there, and trying to make sure that all gets back to the metric sig.
So okay, that answers, I think, one of the questions I had about why the percentiles didn't map well into histograms, is because we don't have the high resolution, the exponential bucketing at this point.
Yeah, we can. So you can configure the histogram with your own set of bucket boundaries that fit percentiles well. And we could try to define ones that fit CPU percentile usage well, that we think are good for users. We can't do that without forcing the user to write this configuration in the SDK or doing some sort of hackery, because there's no API for us to do that right now. When we have high resolution histograms, this probably won't be that big of an issue, because we can use the high resolution histogram, and there should be some way that users can reduce the cost of that if they want. They can move it back to explicit buckets if they're not happy with it, but we'll get high res. We'll have a maximum number of buckets that you'll ever have, and shouldn't be a problem. There's also, we could let users do last value here potentially, but we don't have an instrument that does it by default. So yeah, the TLDR is hopefully when James high resolution histogram stuff is through and we've kind of stabilized that, maybe this won't be an issue. We'll just be using high resolution everywhere. I am only about 60% confident that is going to be the future.
All right. We can come back to, Oh no, exporters own. Oh yeah.
So this is a big PR. The spec for this is going through, but effectively, we're shifting directions in metrics a little bit. We want exporters to be the primary owners of whether you have delta or cumulative metrics, because it's more a matter of what your backend supports than it is like what the API should do. So this is a big shift. There's a spec PR related to it. It's a much bigger PR than I really wanted it to be, but there was a lot to untangle. I'm curious how we feel about making progress on that. I expect it to be. There's one open question in that John raised around where should flexibility live for delta versus cumulative, right? Is it at an exporter level? Is it at the exporter plus the specific metric level, metric type? Is it at, or is it something that users should have 100% configuration over with views? Right now, the way the spec is leaning is views are the ultimate source of truth. If someone configures delta in a view, that is true for all exporters. If an exporter gets something that they can't support, that's an error in the config, and the user sees it logged at runtime, and that's their fault. Exporters are the next source of truth, right? Where like if I am exporting open telemetry protocol, there's going to be an environment config variable that I can use to say I want delta versus cumulative. If I don't specify it, it's cumulative by default. And like the Prometheus exporter will be spec'd to say it only supports cumulatives, because that resolves a lot of issues with that exporter. So that's kind of where the spec is right now. And again, this is a shift where we're moving the notion of aggregation temporality into the exporter. But we have a lot of people who are nervous about flexibility of configuration. And I feel like we opened that can of worms too early in the spec, personally. That's where I sit. I don't know if we need that level of detail all the way down to a particular instrument aggregation temporality level, where I'll be like, I want to export OTLP and I want all my histograms to be deltas and I want all my sums to be cumulatives. I don't know if that's going to be the case. Not really sure. I haven't heard anyone kind of argue with a real life use case for that yet. But that's kind of the open question on this PR and on the spec itself. So I don't know if anyone here has examples that they want to talk through, where they sit on that. Whatever we agree to here, I'd like to take to the metric sig later today to kind of talk through.
One, it's not a real world use case, but it is a consequence of only allowing or not allowing granular temporality. And that is when we did have the summary, the min-max sum count. Min-max sum count doesn't make a lot of sense in cumulative.
Yes.
It's really something that pretty much only makes sense with delta. So I think there will be aggregations, and maybe when we enable custom aggregations specifically, which I know we don't have right now in the SDK, but eventually we're going to let people define their own aggregations, I'm sure. That there will be aggregations that literally just don't make sense in one world or the other. And then how things behave with respect to that setting that the exporter does seems a little bit strange. Like if I said cumulative, but I'm using an instrument or an aggregation that only makes sense for delta, what should happen?
Yeah, one of the issues with summary actually is it shouldn't have aggregation temporality at all,
Right.
by spec.
Yeah.
So by
I mean,
spec,
it's like last
10
value.
minutes.
Like last value also doesn't, right? Last value is in
Yes.
that same bucket. Last value is neither cumulative nor delta. It's just the last value.
Yes. Yeah, and we're storing a lot of data on last value that we don't necessarily need to be able to do cumulatives and deltas. Yeah. totally agree with that. I do feel like there should be a way for a aggregation to not support delta or cumulative, and a custom aggregation. And I think that should make sense, especially if my custom aggregation outputs like 5 gauges or something, right? But I still don't know if we want to expose cumulative and delta at a particular like metric level, or if like aggregators either support both or none. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, all these are excellent questions. I don't have any answers. Yeah, and I think when you say metric, you mean instrument type, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I could imagine, like, that's one of the reasons why you define a view. Like, I want this specific metric or this specific named whatever instrument. I want to have this particular aggregation for it. But that's not something that we talk about. That we're talking about. Well, there was a point in time where we did think about like just exposing the view API to exporters and letting them do whatever they want.
Yep. And then it'd be specific per exporter. Yeah.
Right. Although then again, how that interacts with the user's view configuration gets problematic and complicated. I think the issue is that there are not that many vendors right now that have. Well, there are a limited number of vendors that have explicit metric ingest. Like Splunk doesn't even really have metric ingest yet. And we're just going to take OTLP, I think. Although the delta versus cumulative, I don't know. I have any idea what we're going to do. Because we generate all our metrics based on full fidelity traces, of course. So I don't know that. I think we're all kind of theorizing of all sorts of hypothetical cases of, well, what if a new metrics backend comes along and it does X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
Which is a legitimate concern.
There's 4 metrics backends that I tend to pay attention to, and there's 6 that we look at total that I know of. The number 1 is Prometheus, because we need to be compatible with it. It's the biggest thing in GKE, right? The other one that I personally look at is actually InfluxDB, just because I like it. It's like one of the few things that has infinite cardinality, and that's kind of cool and totally not like any of the other metrics backends. So,
I use it for a project, like a personal project of my own as well. So
yeah, I've never used it in Anger, but I like it personally. You know, it's like it's my Scala of metric backends. Except I use Scala and Anger a lot. Anyway, number 3 is the Google backend, right? So Google backend actually supports both cumulatives and delta. And you can pick your poison. But unfortunately, I think in all cases, we're going to be recommending customers use cumulatives in our backend for the benefits that you get from it, right? There's a possibility that you can get delta metrics, but those are, well, anyway, long story short, we still recommend cumulatives from a query standpoint there. There's Lightstep has a backend that's mostly based on deltas, if I understand what Josh McDonald has described correctly. So I just ask him of what he would need and what he recommends, right? And then Microsoft has 2 different metric backends. They have one that's publicly available to people, and they have one that's privately available. Their backend that's publicly available is based on cumulatives. Their private one for internal usage is based on deltas.
you should also include New Relic in here, because with Jack and UK involved in a lot of this.
Yes, I also rely a lot on Jack's opinion on what he needs for New Relic. Yeah,
yep.
And that is a delta-based system. So
is that true?
I think those are the 6 that I was mentioning, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. So those are the 6 backends that we tend to use to do our evaluation. And I think it's pretty rich in terms of like understanding use cases. But I agree that we we don't really know if there's going to be something that comes out that needs really, really fine-grained changes to here. And there's a lot of hard decisions to make sometimes with deltas, right?
Yep. Cool. Well, that's good. I mean, that looks like a good list.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, influx is an interesting one though that I didn't know that you were at least personally looking at. That's cool.
Yeah, someone internally like recommended I take a look at it, and I was like, wow, this is I wish I could try it out at scale. I also don't want to actually hold a pager for it, I think, from what I can tell. But I do want to try it out on something like big at some point. But it's very cool.
Yeah, I use their cloud, their SaaS InfluxDB for a personal project that just writes the temperature of my wine cellar once a minute to it. And the nice thing is the data is so small. I think I've been running it for 4 months now, and I think my total bill is up to 8 cents. So they won't bill for less than $1. So I might get a bill in a couple of years at some point.
I should try to do this for next time I go smoke meat and have that for my thermometer.
So they have a nice,
Nice.
you're saying that this is a nice SaaS offering?
They do have a SaaS offering.
Yeah.
That is based purely on the number of bytes that you are storing. Well, I think and queries. So if you're doing a lot of queries, it also costs money. But mostly what I'm doing is storing the data and looking at graphs once every couple weeks. So yeah, I think, as I said, my total bill after 3 months, I think or 4 months is up to about 8 cents. So for personal
in any
projects,
case,
it's very affordable.
yes, everyone should look at it if you're interested in metrics and want to see like a really cool way of taking in metrics and querying for them. So just to recap though, I think if you look at that PR, like I said, unfortunately it's larger than I intended, but that open question of where and how granular do we want delta and cumulative configuration? I know John's going to be at the metric sig or will comment there, one or the other. But if you have concerns or comments, like now's the time to raise them, because I think it's still open from Riley, that some of that PR is in the spec and some of it is not. Some of it's in an open PR and it's guidance. I want to make sure that whatever we decide here is like reflected upstream. The other thing I'll call out is this design is also what .NET is doing for their metric API, the way exporters work and the way views work between the two, as far as I understand.
I think one of the other proposals that I think you maybe didn't mention is that maybe views no longer have the option to specify that it's only an exporter concern.
Yes, I thought if I didn't mention it, apologies. I tried to mention that. That is totally an option of something that we could do. Yes, and I think there's a lot of merit to that as well, potentially, because I do think effectively aggregation temporality is really a storage concern more so than anything else, because it's how good your query engine can handle the data determines what aggregation temporality you're going to use for this data effectively. So I think that's a good call out. My only concern there is around configuration, which I put in the bug. So it's worth reading that comment thread. I think it's the only one that's still open from John.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have not had a chance to really comb through the 1,500 lines of changes in there.
Sorry. Do you want me to try to fragment it? It would be about another week or two, I think, to get that out. I
don't know. I'm really hoping that kind of you and Jack could be mostly collaborating on that, and I'm more of a rubber stamp with whatever the two of you come up with.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. I've only had comments on how bad my spelling is so far, which is pretty bad.
That's the stuff that my brain when I'm just like, I can skim through really fast and see typos, but actually looking at code is a lot harder.
Really, they just disappear to me. It's like the worst. Like even code comments with to-dos, they disappear. I just don't see them anymore. Okay, I think I spent too much on that. Please take a look and let us know what you think if you care. Real quick though, I want to call out, I'm working on the OTel roadmap. We're trying to coordinate across different SIGs and different different pieces of the TC, different owners, and we want to put out a new roadmap. We get a lot of, yeah, I think there's a community issue on this. But we're talking about this in the last TC meeting that it's time to update the roadmap. And so I'm working on a outline, and I want to make sure that things are added related to what everybody's doing. So if you have, can I share the, I will add a link maybe in the docs because this is not shared yet. But effectively, there's going to be a section on what's happening with metrics, what's happening with logs, what's happening with trace, focused on sampling, what's happening with instrumentation and the semantic convention stability, what's happening in the collector. Then we're going to have a bit of a roadmap around open tracing, open census, deprecation, migration paths. And then there's this open question of what else do we need to cover in the roadmap. So if you're aware of frequently asked questions from users, if you look in that thread, you'll see a lot of things that people want. The one that scares me the most is they want a Gantt chart of here's what we're going to work on in what month. And I'm like, this is open source. We have people who come in and do stuff and then leave. We don't know who's going to come in and do stuff, but to the extent that we could say what we know we're working on, I was going to just kind of pull from, like, for example, instrumentation API stability and this converting to the instrumenter API as like a thing that Java's been working on, the stability of the agent, things that are in there. I'm going to throw out a rough outline and then send it for people to add and contribute to. So just as an FYI, that should hit sometime next week.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe just in Slack, if you post the link to the doc, I'm sure people would. I'd be happy to go in and update stuff.
Cool. Yeah. And if you do, just feel free to add yourself to like the author. Maybe we can get all of OpenTelemetry as an author of this thing, or we won't even write it. The author tag. Anyway, that's probably an internal Google joke that no one gets.
Like CRs.
You have to,
MRs,
yeah, like
or
they're called CLs. Yeah.
CLs.
You have to have an author tag on almost everything for some reason, and it annoys the heck out of me.
Yeah, we've explicitly banned them in our repos.
Cool. So we've got 2 minutes left here. Just briefly, great progress on the instrumenter API conversions. Want to call out thank you Team Splunk, and yeah, lots of fun netty stuff, and some a little bit more about instrumentation API stability of just, we're starting to fine tune things like naming and kind of going through in more detail. Other things that went in this last week, this was a good one. Thank you, Lori. I ran into this problem where Spring Beans was finding our some methods that we were injecting into classes and causing it to fail a user app. And so this was a nice, again, we've hijacked reflection to basically hide the things that we add to classes from reflection, which is very clever. This was a recent spec update. Oh yeah, thank you, Mateusz, for all the doc work. I know there's another big PR out that Mateusz put. It's really nice. So we have some really nice doc on writing instrumentation, which is complicated in the agent world. more netty stuff. As much as we want to get rid of netty instrumentation, we keep improving it at the same time. In case folks don't know, like our long-term goal is to instrument the things that use netty and not instrument and disable the netty instrumentation by default, at least. Just because it's a little too low level to do things like to capture things properly when it comes to like HTTP2 pipelining and things like that. Metric dimensions. So I started using metrics in anger, and well, not a lot of anger yet, but a little bit of anger, and ran into, we weren't capturing status code, which is a very important dimension. Yes, thank you, Nikita, for all of this work around the smoke test matrix stuff. I had really struggled understanding and doing things in the smoke test matrix previously, and Nikita did some great stuff to simplify that. So any other topics, thoughts? All right, well, let's end on time. Thank you all.
Thanks all. See ya.
Thanks.
Fast for running the meeting.